Hello, everybody, and welcome to Information Requested, a podcast about progression fantasy and other things we think about. My name is Bamfilosophy, also known as Bamf,
and I'm
here with Remixed, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Remixed, how's your holidays, man?
Pretty good.
Happy holidays.
Good. Quiet. Yeah, you too. Quiet, more quiet than usual just because of the pandemic, but definitely spent some time with the closest of family members, my wife and my sort of kid that lives with us.
Nice. Well, congratulations on that. The little one on the way.
Yeah,
I went to Houston, actually, and kind of had a bigger Christmas, mainly because my mom's already had COVID. She beat it in like a very short amount of time.
Nice.
She was doing all the preventative stuff, still got it. But because of that, everyone in my immediate family has been tested, and everyone tested negative. And so she was just self-quarantining until she tested negative. So we knew that everyone in our immediate family was negative. And so we were able to go and have a good time. And it was nice because it was the first bit of like normalcy of this year, because Thanksgiving was awkward because of like that COVID situation like manifesting. But the Christmas has been great. And New Year's is going to be great too. So, but we're squeezing in another podcast right before the new year. So right. This is episode 3 coming to you at the tail end of 2020. And we're hoping to bring you into the new year with some fun progression fantasy content. So,
right. And we're hoping the title won't change every episode soon. So,
yeah, I was about to say, you might have noticed that our intro is ever changing. It's like trying on a different hat, you know, you got to see how it feels. And I think that with regards to the contest, and Remix, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're on the same page here that Information Requested is in the lead.
Absolutely. It's something we both like, and it has something to do with, you know, the series that's inspiring this thing to start from the beginning. So it's
and podcast of progressive intent confused someone. They thought it was like, or that first of all, they were worried it was a political podcast. Like, come on. Obviously it's not. But
right.
Now it has soiled that title for us. So Information Requested it is. And I have a lot of information to request from you, Remixed.
Okay.
But before I do, we will announce the winner next week. For those of you watching on YouTube, I have your signed copy here. You can witness that it is a legitimately signed copy by Mr. Will White. I would compare it, but I don't want to reach up to the other ones. But it's legit.
Nice.
It has the Bamfia certificate of authenticity. All right, Remixed. I have some information to request of you.
All right. Request away.
What have you read lately? What have you read lately, and tell me about it?
Good question. So the thing I've been reading most recently is a book you recommended to me, actually. It's in the lit RPG genre, and it's called The Hero of Thera. It's really good so far. It's really interesting. And I don't want to spoil a whole lot of things, but a high-level overview is this man is sentenced to death. He finds a way out via an alternate universe where video game rules are real life. And, you know, you die in the game, you die in real life kind of scenario, and then everything gets flipped against what you would expect to normally happen in a series like that. And that's why I'm really, really enjoying it. It's got a really good set of rules that aren't necessarily typical for that genre either. So there's a lot of surprises around the corner. The writing is really, really good. And
that's cool to hear from, because I'm not a big lit RPG reader, and I know this is not a lit RPG podcast, but this is a book I recommended to Remixed, and it is progression adjacent. So it works. But the reason why I read it to begin with is because it's written by a guy named Eric Nyland, and Eric Nyland wrote many of the Halo books early on. He wrote The Fall of Reach. He wrote a couple other books, I think The Ghosts of Onyx. These are books that I read in high school. And so he's a legitimate author, and he wanted to venture into the lit RPG realm. and he wrote some good stuff. Now, I realize that what you just described, a lot of you listening to this are probably like rolling your eyes, like, oh, that's like how all the lit RPGs start. But it very quickly turns the tropes on its head, and it does it in a pretty creative way. Like, for example, the MC was he was framed. He was framed. That's why he's on death row. And he was a gamer his whole life. And so because of that, because he was framed, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler for you, but in like an abstract way, remixed.
Okay.
The person that framed him is one of the reasons why he was at the top of the list to trial for this game, for this like universe impacting IRL.
That definitely
game.
does make me able to guess what I think who framed him, but that's totally fine because I kind of
we can talk about it in a couple
expecting
episodes.
of that already. So yeah,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really good so far. And yeah, it does start out with the tropes of lit RPG, and then it, like you said, it turns those tropes around pretty quick. I would say it just establishes you in a familiar setting, and then takes that away pretty quick, I think. So it's really cool.
Yeah, the sequel is called like 1,000 Drunken Monkeys. It's pretty good too.
Right.
Solid stuff. Cool. Want to hear what I've read lately?
Absolutely.
Would you like to request some information from me? I have been reading a series you recommended called The Tao of Magic. And if I could explain this, how can I explain this? I'm probably going to like make some of you not want to read it, but I've enjoyed it so far. It's like if you took like the smartest character in the American Pie movie and then like had him pass away and get isekai'd into like a 10-year-old cultivator's body.
That's such a weird way to put it. That's funny.
Almost ascend, but then get bitch slapped back to like a lesser realm and have to start your cultivation over. So he gets isekai'd twice, and he starts off on this planet with like a lesser system. So it would be like if your emotions could create an effect on the energy, and different emotions could affect different affinities of the elements. And then if you combined all those affinities together, you'd get basic pure Madra. And then you can manipulate that. And so that's kind of like how the book starts. He gets, bitch slapped back to a lesser plane of existence, and then gets to go about doing stuff. But he's basically like the smartest character in American Pie. I say that because he's like an immature immortal, super smart. He applies like the scientific method to everything that he does. His Tao is like the Tao of neutrality and freedom. And so he tries to stay out of all affairs, and he ends up continually screwing up and then like thinking himself out of his situations, constantly like creating comedic situations. One of the reviews I read said, "This book sucks, but I can't stop reading it and I love it." This is for book 3.
That is perfect. That's a perfect way to put it.
And so if the author's reading this or listening to this, I think your writing is hilarious. I think that if you had like a grammar editor, that would be helpful, because I've like read the book while listening to the audiobook, and the audio narrator will like fix some of the typos as he's reading it.
Interesting. I didn't know
and
that.
I even noticed that the audio narrator changed 1 or 2 words in some of the comedic lines to make them less cringy, and it made them funnier in the process.
That's funny. I haven't read it. I've only listened to it, so that's interesting to know that it's written a little bit differently.
But the first 2.5 books are good enough to scratch the itch for you Cradle lovers out there. One of the reasons Will wrote Cradle is so that he could like have a book series to recommend to people that like fantasy, that doesn't have like the caveats when you recommend something that has some cringe in it. Like, so I'm about to give a caveat. The MC says some like pretty dumb stuff. Like, it might offend some people, but it is said with like comedic intent. And so if you take it at that face value of it being comedy, it's pretty funny because in a sense, the book is from a first person point of view, and he's basically narrating the story in his own head the whole time. And so like you get his like the filter of his ego and how he thinks about things. And like, so it's a very unfiltered view of the main character's existence. I think it's worth a read. It's like 99 cents on Kindle, and then the audiobook is like a couple bucks more. So I think it's worth it. But with that being said, let's move on to progression fantasy at its finest. And today's topic, Remix, why don't you let us know what today's topic is?
Today we're going to be talking about magic systems and specifically what makes progressive fantasy progressive as far as magic system goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Like what to us, because there are some, it's a relatively new subgenre, right? Mm-hmm. And so not all the books that we would consider progression fantasy are put into this subgenre.
Right.
So Remix, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. What do you think I'm putting you on the spot here, I know. No, but in fine. Your own words, like, or in your own thoughts, what do you consider to be a progression fantasy novel?
I think at the loosest terms, you could easily draw a hierarchy of the magic system itself, or almost like a tournament bracket, or a family tree of some sort, maybe with only one parent instead of two parents. But basically, there's a way to find out how strong somebody is in relation to everyone else. And when I say strong, I mean advanced in the magic system. So there's a clear top, at least from the perspective of the main character of the book. You at least have a perception of where you think the top is and where the bottom is. There's no extreme blurred between, like the strongest mage and the weakest mage, quote unquote, in the world. So an example would be from the sufficiently advanced magic system having the different colors of core. I think it's actually been a while.
It's the different. It's the amount of mana that you have determines your, I guess, tier or like the potency, and it also determines the power of your shroud.
Right.
Which is kind of like your defense, like your passive defense.
Right. And then in Cradle, you have an extremely well-defined magic system where each level has a name, and generally a way to get there is revealed, like what defines somebody that's a sage, somebody that's manifested in an icon, and also is an archlord, and maybe
most
that's
of the time.
One part, yeah.
Most of the time,
right? So
I mean that's the most abstract of them all too, and so like the fact that the most abstract tier still has like a set sequence of rules around it, I think is important to me. So like for me, and you nailed most of it on the head with regards to like the tiers of power. But for me, a progression fantasy novel puts the requirement of improvement or getting stronger as a major plot point. Okay. Because you have some other novels where they have like a progressive magic system, but the plot doesn't necessarily revolve around their power up. So the only really good example I could think of since we started recording this episode is the Stormlight Archive.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have your Knights Radiant, and they say their oaths, and they're able to increase their power. Right. So one of in the first two books, the amount of oaths that you've sworn didn't really impact the plot. It wasn't like a core component of the plot. Like I think the plot of the second book was to like bring all the different nations together because the Everstorm's coming. The plot of the first book is following Kaladin's journey through being a slave with Bridge 4 and Shallan's journey of trying to steal a Fabrial from Yasna, right, and then finding herself, in the camps.
So in this instance, you don't consider the Stormlight Archive a progressive fantasy?
I don't consider the Stormlight Archive progression fantasy, but I consider it to have a progression-based magic system.
Right.
Because as you say more oaths, you get stronger.
Right. So I think that
Right.
a lot of Brandon Sanderson's books in general are probably what we would call adjacent to progression fantasy, just because the plot usually doesn't revolve around the magic system, but his magic systems are always well defined, which is kind of
getting stronger isn't like a major plot point. I agree. Like in Warbreaker, there are literal tiers of what's it called? I guess investiture, but with how many souls you have.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, like there are literal tiers, and but those aren't a main part. That doesn't push the plot along. Like in Cradle, for them to achieve their goals, they have to level up. They have to progress. In Arcane Ascension, for them to achieve their goals, they have to progress and get stronger.
And usually the way that you move the plot is to the character needs to go somewhere in order to progress. So like, Black Flame
have a training montage.
The Black Flame Empire. They're always talking about training pills and stuff like that. And and so
like the classic like magic system type of thing that I find most common, I guess it's a different adjacent genre or like a subgenre, is the wuxia or the zhanxia Chinese genres that are based around cultivation. For the zhanxia and the wuxia based around like the magical martial arts.
Right.
And so like the cultivation type thing is it's a very well trodden path. There are very well defined tropes, but that again doesn't necessarily put that in the genre of progression fantasy, because it doesn't have to be cultivation. It just has to be a magic system in which you have to progress through it to achieve the main points of the plot for the main characters.
Right.
What other do you have any other like examples? Because I mean, like street cultivation, that's cultivation. Harry Potter, kind of. I can talk about that. My thoughts there. What about you?
I would say another adjacent genre is the lit RPG genre, because it's almost like the other extreme when we're talking about like Brandon Sanderson isn't quite progression fantasy because the plot doesn't revolve specifically around the magic system itself, or it doesn't require the magic system to move the plot along. Rather, you have the other end of the spectrum, like where that's most of the book is the magic system itself, or even not necessarily magic, but the way that a character progresses is they literally level up and stuff. So there's not a well-defined way of how this person is achieving all of this power. It's more of they're allocating stat points, and there's so much information that it's not exactly progression fantasy, I think, because
once you have a stat sheet, that's when it becomes like game lit or like lit RPG.
Right. So
I don't know a whole lot about game lit. Are there stat sheets in game lit?
A lot of times, yes. Sometimes no, but I would say about 80% of the time there are, and that's I think where you kind of start. It's really difficult to define a difference between progressive and non-progressive when there isn't a stat sheet, but it's like a video game based world kind of. I think you could call some of those books. There's a book called Dante's Immortality, and I really wish the author would pick the book series back up and finish it. By the way, but that series I would consider more of a progressive fantasy, even though there is I think a stat sheet maybe one or two times in that book. The way that the magic system works and is defined is a lot more intricate. So like you understand how these people are gaining their power other than getting experience for killing something. If that makes sense. Like Lyndon can't just kill a dread beast and get 200,000 experience and level up to the next level and he's a sage. I think that's what makes that a progressive fantasy as far as Cradle goes. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much that Cradle does well that I don't see a lot of other series doing well. I mean, Street Cultivation and Arcane Ascension both have had stat sheets. With Street Cultivation, you have your portfolio where you look and see what your Lucrum soul like is, and you can see your different cores and stuff. And then even with Arcane Ascension, In the first book, the main character creates a tool to measure his mana, which then, it actually becomes a plot point where the main character becomes addicted to checking his stats.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And like he like makes it like a logical thing to himself because his what's it called? His like mark on his forehead is like an enchanter's mark. And he's like, well, I have mental mana, so if I use too much of it, I'll go insane because, reasons. So he's like, I have to check it. So there's like a fallacy there. There's a cognitive bias, which I think was interesting. But then in book 3, he's like really trying not to check his stats. So I think he only checks his stats like twice in the whole book. But even then, like even in that context, there's still technically a stat sheet, which is why I love that Cradle doesn't do that basically at all. At all. It's all still by like your feel.
Right. I think part of the reason why we like Cradle so much is how organic it feels, for sure. It feels really well thought out compared to a lot of series, even series that I enjoy. I think that Cradle just takes it up one notch for sure. But yeah.
No, I agree. Like its setting is based far enough into the use of the magic system that most, like a lot of the stuff is pretty well thought out. But with Cradle, I still feel like there's let's back up a bit. With street cultivation, you're in like the modern day technological. There are cars, there are phones, there are planes, there's electricity. In Arcane Ascension, you have pistols and trains and locomotives that are just coming onto the scene. But in Cradle, I feel like the planet was going there before the Dread Gods broke free. And now it's like they're like stuck. They're stuck in like a stasis where there's not a whole lot of culture progression. There's not a whole lot of like people becoming a sage before Arc Lord. The willpower isn't as strong ahead of time because paths are much safer. Things like that. It feels like the progression of the planet itself has stagnated, even though the way that the planet's magic is structured requires you to progress and get so strong that the Abaddon want you. But I think the Dread Gods prevent true global civilization from emerging and then allowing innovation to happen.
That actually allows us to segue into the next segment because there's a small theory, Cradle Crazy theory that I wanted to talk about that you just made me think of, which is perhaps the progression of the planet isn't just because of the Dread Gods, but it's because of the monarchs of the current monarchs refusing to ascend. So you're kind of having a stagnant top of the tree, so to speak. Like nobody else is. There's no room for another monarch to ascend because everything is stabilizing so much, and you've had the same leaders for hundreds of years.
Well, what's odd is, I agree. Like I agree with that. But what's odd is there used to be room for 12. Then there was only room for 8. And now we've heard about like the balance. And it's almost like there's not room for 8 again. There's only room for 7. You know what I mean? Ooh. I mean, we don't know that for sure. There could be room for 8 because we don't know what's going on with Fury or what's going to happen, or if someone else is going to hit Monarch 2. So we just don't know. But before we transition into the theories, I want to backtrack a little bit to the progression fantasy magic. Sure. Like what makes progression fantasy, and I want to like pass the ball to the listeners. What do y'all think? Well, what do you think signifies a progression fantasy book? Let us know in the comments on YouTube, or I don't know, where else can they hit us up? In the Discord?
In the Discord, or
come hang out in the Discord. Yeah, well, don't send me an email, but definitely hit me up on YouTube or on the Discord, and let us know what you think. What are some great progression fantasy books that you've read in the past that now that there's a subgenre that series would fit into it? I want to hear what your thoughts are. Please let us know. All right, now we can move into the crazy theories.
Right. Okay. So we want to bring up the same topic as before that we promised we would continue, which was your crazy Nethergate theory. So let's remind the audience of what that started.
I touched on it. It's like, okay, so there are two different theories. I kind of touched on the fact that the Nethergate is very likely has a portal network as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a super tinfoil hat theory about the Nethergate as like a whole, like what it used to represent and like what the labyrinth used to represent and like what it has become in the current day. And it kind of fits into what I'm saying where like it's almost like a post-apocalyptic Cradle, in my opinion. And I'll just start from the beginning. There are some things that we know. We know that the very first Abaddon came from Cradle. We know that most of the original Court of Seven came from Cradle. I'm going to pause there. What that means is the first guy or gal who ascended, there were no rules. There was no Eldari Pact. So they could go back to Cradle. They could go back to Cradle. They could bring their knowledge back. They could teach other people. And they probably did because they wanted some help, at the celestial level. Then we have more people ascending from Cradle. And they were on the same side. So that leads me to believe that there was some collusion. There was some, mentor-mentee stuff happening that allowed for people from Cradle to ascend. Now, what are you going to do if you have a working formula that allows you to have several judges, like super strong people? Keep that up. You use Cradle as your Cradle, because at the time, Cradle didn't have a name, right? There was no like iteration 110. They hadn't cataloged everything yet.
Very true.
And so it makes me feel like let's make this like a metaphor that we can all come to know. When you meet somebody that's from your neighborhood or from your neck of the woods or from your hometown, if you live in a smaller town, you have an affinity with them. Anywhere in the world, if I meet a Texan, I feel like an affinity with them. So if I'm going to start some kind of like global organization, I feel like I can probably trust someone that comes from the same place I did in a way. I know that's like, but like you kind of get what my point here is.
Right. You have the same upbringing. So you have a lot of things in common just by nature of.
So the idea is the Cradle became a hub for grooming Abaddon. Now, something probably happened that screwed up the fate of Cradle, and they had to intervene, stop it from happening, and then sign the Eldari Pact. So I think that something really bad almost happened to Cradle, which forced them to sign the Eldari Pact. Now, that means that they can't jack with Cradle anymore, but it doesn't mean that what they've already done to Cradle doesn't still get to be there. What I think happens is when they sign the Eldari Pact and they stop jacking with Cradle, with the fate of Cradle, they still had to intervene more often because there were still people, long-lived individuals who knew of the Abaddon, who knew the secrets of the Abaddon, who knew how to get to Monarch and ascend and do all this stuff and create the technology. They weren't ignorant yet. They still had the ability to create Abaddon-level technology. And I think that Osriel is a byproduct of that. I think he was born into a civilization that was very aware of what the Abaddon could do. And when he was a monarch, he was able to create an Abaddon-level artifact called Penance. Now, how does this relate to the Nethergate? In Unsold, when Lyndon's mother is telling him, this is, if you want to know what part of the book it's in, I think it's like 100 and something pages in. It's when Lyndon is going to the tournament grounds to hide the bees, the remnant bees underground, and then his mom comes and catches him, and they have a conversation. She tells him about how the Lee clan got an artifact, a tablet, a part of a tablet from the Nethergate, and it seems to lead everyone to believe that it talked of a portal that would allow someone to step through it and arrive in another world.
Right. I actually just reread that last week, and I thought it was alluding to Lee Markuth coming, but maybe it's red herring.
I mean, it it was alluding to Lee Marketh coming,
Right.
but it implies that the Lee Marketh existed on Cradle when that kind of knowledge was commonplace, where even like an Arc Lord would know how to train someone to open up a Class 6 gate using weakened, shitty little Space Authority remnants. We're able to gather these remnants in Sacred Valley, where we know that there's a suppression field. Right? So Lee Marketh had the knowledge to to teach barbarians how to do it. So he came from before. But the tablet was what they had to use to make the script circle proper. It was just chilling outside the Nether Gate. The Nether Gate opens every 10 years. The Aurelius Gate opens every 10 years. We know that's a portal from between continents, but Sacred Valley is kind of a big deal. It's the whole foundation of the Sacred Valley is the labyrinth, and there's a connection with the Dread Gods. And so I'm assuming that is a big assumption that the Nether Gate originally was a portal off-world. This is how Lee Marketh was able to leave when he had to leave because of new rules and restrictions. Okay, he was an Arc Lord, but he knew of the Eldari Pact. But he didn't seem to be an Abaddon. He wasn't wearing armor. He didn't seem to be a member of the Abaddon, but he still had to sign the pact, allegedly. Right. So I think that the Nether Gate was originally a portal off-world. That's what they used to leave. They had to like break it and shut it down. I think that potentially this is already pretty tinfoily, but there's some progressive logic that could get you here. This is where it gets super tinfoily. I think that there's a lot of potential that Osriel was jacked with by the Abaddon ahead of time. They manipulated him into doing whatever he did with the labyrinth that led to the Dread Gods being created, which then basically neutered Cradle and put it into a state of stability, if you will, because it created a situation where the strongest, most knowledgeable people on the planet are like routinely murdered either by each other or by the Dread Gods because they are no longer the top of the food chain. And so they tend to die. And so their knowledge gets lost with them. It's probably why the Nine Cloud Court, the Shah family created their technique to pass on both knowledge and powerful spirit and icon authority, all that, pass it down, because it's a way for them to protect their knowledge. But even then, it's not perfect. Some knowledge is lost. So over the multiple thousands of years, some knowledge has been lost. But they're still like one of the powerhouses on the planet. They have the most technology. They have the biggest cities. They have all this cool stuff, right? So I'm thinking that the Dread Gods were a way to stabilize fate on Cradle by neutering the knowledge of the past.
I see.
Not necessarily the sacred arts, but of beyond that.
That's a lot.
I know. I wanted to talk about it last time.
It's just saying, that's like so much to think
super
about.
Deep. Think about it though.
Yeah.
It makes sense. A lot of people listening to this are going to be like, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But if there was anyone that has said enough decent theories that have come true, I've said a lot of dumb ones, but enough decent ones that this is like my grand historical unifying theory of Cradle.
This is your Nobel Prize of Cradle theories.
Even if like 10% of it's right, that would be so cool.
Yeah, I definitely hope that something that I've thought of is true at some point. Will, if you're listening to this, please. I'm just kidding.
What theory would you want to be real? If you could pick any theory that you've made in the past to be real, what would it be?
Well, the one I was talking about last time, I feel like it divulged into the into randomness that we were talking about, like all the icons that people have manifested. But I think that there being a hunger icon, or maybe Lyndon creating the hunger icon or something like that, I feel like that would be pretty fulfilling if that actually existed.
That'd be interesting.
And I feel like if that is the case, like if that were to happen, there's got to be some sort of enlightenment that they get from that it kind of gives you insight to the Abaddon. So it would be a major plot device kind of thing if it did happen. But
ooh, wouldn't it be weird if like right at the end of Cradle, right before they ascend, they're in like a wasteland of destroyed dread gods with like hunger, Madra everywhere. And they're all like kind of like self-absorbed in that aura. And they all are like as a team have like an insane ambition. Like, guys, what if we created our own organization? Or it's like something where they're like together have a unified conceptual idea of ambition that they manifest something like that. And then they look up and they're like, oh, who manifested it? All of us did.
Yeah, that'd be
crazy. And then boom, the book ends. We'll see you next time in the forthcoming series from Will White, debuting in 2025, called, I don't know, Threshold or Sanctum or Ascension or something.
Those moments are the moments that I like to call being happy and angry at the same time. That's the exact combination of bittersweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know how I forget these words sometimes, but for sure. The hunger icon thing, definitely want it to be true, but I'm not sure it is, but we'll see. I'm hoping I'm right. But
gotcha. I don't think, just for those of you listening that have heard 2 episodes in a row of like wild Cradle theories, I don't know if I have a wilder Cradle theory. Like I can tell you what theory I've made in the past that I want to be right so bad. I can tell you that right now. Do you want to hear it remixed?
Absolutely. I'm ready.
Okay. So I really want Ethan to have a movement technique that allows him to teleport anywhere that his spider web of information reaches. This is like 303 dimensions, 360, whatever ability to teleport up, down, left, right, center, back, whatever. But it's only within his like ability to sense. If he focuses it in, he can teleport farther. But that's it. But he's like a master of his spider web, his informational spider web, because I think that the Abaddon division that he most closely aligns with right now is the spider division, which would be and for those of you just listening, I'm throwing up quotes, the icon. The icon. Or as we are probably assuming it's called the Oracle icon, based on Claudia Aurelius being called the Oracle Sage. Yeah, I'm really hoping he has a movement technique where he can just teleport on his web, only on his web.
It might be a little mean of me, but here's what I really want to happen, and that is for somehow that gets mentioned as a possibility to Ethan. Or like maybe somebody asks him that as a question and he'll be like, don't be ridiculous. Or like, he shoots it down himself. Like Ethan's showing.
What you really want to happen is for Will to publicly acknowledge a public theory of mine and take a big stinky shit all over it in the book.
In the book. It was so good.
Desire.
Just like the Blaren name thing that they decided against.
I was not the first person to name Ruby. There was another.
Oh, okay.
There was another. Rogue9 is his Reddit, part of his Reddit name. Oh. And he mentioned Ruby, I think, like 13 hours before I did.
Interesting. Well, it's a great
so he gets the credit. But that's, there's probably a lot of other people that are listening right now that it would just make their world if Will publicly took a big old dump on one of my theories.
I think I might be one of them because
you are officially on record as being, the sect leader of the big old dump on Bamf's theories.
Bamf dumping sect, yeah.
The shit on Bamf's theories sect, yes.
Well, I can't. I
wouldn't be surprised if this got big enough, if something with like a fan service type thing happened in the bloopers. It's happened before. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, that's pretty much along the lines what I was going to say. So, yeah, that's...
The blooper section.
One can dream
This-
of being
I
in
don't
the
know, man.
bloopers.
That sounds like a nightmare to me.
What, being in the bloopers?
No, like, well, having like a theory just dumped on
well,
in like all its majesty.
I think being acknowledged in the first place is probably a pretty high. It means that your theory probably had some clout, and then people got behind it, and then he's like, dang, this is getting pretty big. I better shoot it down. That's what I feel like is going to happen. You're going to have like a whole subreddit dedicated to your theory, and it's going to be called the Athen Teleport Progressive Fantasy. I don't know.
The Athen Teleport Paradox.
Yeah, some huge theory. There's a whole wiki page on it. Will White's like, this is getting out of control. Got to make a blooper.
Were you around during the Core Wars?
No, I don't know what that is, so I'm guessing I wasn't around.
Do you remember the blooper where Lyndon is saying how that's odd? I was just cycling my Heart of Twin Stars, preparing to split my core again, and I heard like thousands of people screaming. And then
yeah,
and Athen's like, "Oh, okay," and he's like, "But then when I decided not to, I heard a different group of thousands of people screaming." And Athen's like, "Oh, that's odd. And you're sure they're two different groups?" Yes. That is an homage to the Core Wars, which was a part of Reddit history that will live on in infamy, where it was the first disagreement at a community-wide level where there were two very polarized sides, and they got nasty. Like people were, personally shaming each other's families in the threads, talking about like one side wanted Lyndon to split his cores indefinitely and have all the paths. And the other side thought that was stupid and that no more splitting of cores should ever happen.
Oh, what side were you on?
Well, I don't know. I was picking my nose throughout this whole thing. I wasn't paying attention to the Reddit at this point, but I'm of the opinion that he should not split his core anymore. Like, it took him 8 books to bring all the different tools he had at his disposal into like one cohesive path, right? So he's been trying to develop 2 paths the entire time. And so then 8 books in, he finally brings it all together. And it takes him manifesting an icon to do it. Like, imagine he would be crippled in his progression. He wouldn't be able to bring it all together if he had too many paths.
Yeah, that's kind of hinted at so much in the second book, I believe. We're talking about him having 2 paths.
Yaren's like, you're so dumb. Like, why? Like, you suck already. Why are you trying to like suck like 3 times over?
I do remember when I first started the second book, I definitely thought about him splitting his cores again, and I thought that might be something that happened, and probably something that I wanted to happen. But that's definitely gone away now. Like, just understanding more in general, like him splitting his cores is a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to reignite the wars here, but they didn't really start until, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I don't think they started until Athen gave Lyndon his Jade cycling technique, the Heaven and Earth Purification Wheel, which was his way of bringing his 2 super small cores to 2 normal size cores, which then effectively takes away the
negatives.
Well, not the negatives, but like the obvious magic system deficiencies of it. So like the negatives of the core size part, not the negatives of having to, study 2 different paths and deal with having to cycle 2 different matter types in your body without your body like ripping itself apart, which Athen solved with the Bloodforged Iron Body. Right. It's all sorts of stuff that Athen jammed into Lyndon that made it all.
Imagine if he hadn't met Athen, which, I mean, I guess was all part of the plan. I love, like, that's how good the writing is. Like, I have to think about it. Like, Serial being able to interact with fate, like, totally just covers up any, like, coincidence sounding.
She didn't see Athen coming either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was the whole point of, like, the whole iteration going dark in 30 years was that she looked at his fate, but she didn't anticipate her changing his fate, coming in contact with Athen Aurelius, who had his fate changed by Tiberian, because Athen would have never been in the Black Flame Empire again. had he not raided Tiberian's tomb or whatever, or not Tiberian, but had he not raided Osriel's tomb, convinced Tiberian that they could kill the Dread Gods, and then have Tiberian go talk to Rhaegan Shen and get murked. Because the end result of that conflict was Aethan coming through the portal by himself, off cycle, which is interesting enough.
Yeah, I feel like I need a side story from when that happened. We definitely need like a little novella of Aethan watching that happen.
Yeah, at some point, I don't know if we're requesting novellas. I think it'd be cool to get a novella from Fury's point of view, like during one of his epic ancient battles. Like, what did he do that led to him being a mythological figure in some cultures? Or even, I'll do you one better. What if we get like a little short story of him fighting against the four cults and against Zorus?
Yeah, that'd be
like, obviously we don't know what the repercussions of that battle are, but imagine being inside Fury's head when he's like sitting there cycling, waiting to hear about Yaren, and because he's going Monarch regardless, right?
Right.
And so he's thinking like, how am I going to do this? This is going to be so much fun. This is going to be so much fun. Oh, but this would be so much better if they weren't suspecting it. Ooh, man, I hope Yaren wins. And he's like inside his head, just like, I feel like inside Fury's head, he's like playing with toys in his own mind or something, like doing something simple.
Fury is
just like wanting to fight.
He's a stereotypical ADHDer for sure. He's just one thing.
He's Goku.
Next. Yeah.
He's Goku from Dragon Ball Z. So that'd be cool to get inside his head and to feel him, like to get a POV of him fighting. I think that would be extra special.
Oh, yeah. That'd be sick. So we'll get on it. We need a couple of side novellas from you just as soon as you get back from your break.
Well, no, yeah. No writing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy your vacation. It just started.
But when you get back.
Sam, if you're listening to this, Rebecca, if you're listening to this, don't share it with Will. Because I don't want you to give him ideas to take a big fat dump on my theories publicly.
Definitely do that. Just share the segment where we want him to dump on his theories. You don't have to show anything else.
The first time Will hears about this podcast is whenever we're asking him to do an interview, an innocent little interview, where we talk to him about writing.
Well, I mean, it better be a solo episode because I'm definitely going to mention this now. So.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, maybe he'll just be the nice guy that he is, and he'll never do it, which I think is
he'll never do it. Okay.
I think is less likely than him actually doing it, which is a sad thing. I think the likelihood of him doing it is low, but I think the likelihood of him purposefully not doing it out of the kindness of his heart is less likely. He might just not do it just because he doesn't care and he doesn't want us to, like, he has his own thoughts about his story, which is what should be.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, fans of this podcast or fans of Cradle, what did you think of the super crazy tinfoil hat theory I have about the history of Cradle, the Nethergate being a portal to another world, and how Cradle has been since neutered using the Dread Gods to erase knowledge of the Abaddon's past dealings on Cradle?
Right. We need more people to be dumping on his theories because I can't do it by myself. So
please let me know. I hope no one listens to this. We're going to be talking into the ether from now on.
Yeah, but definitely let us know what you think about all of this stuff and leave your own crazy tinfoil theory hats in the comments or in the Discord for sure, and we might address them in the next episode. And we hope you guys had a wonderful holiday. I think we're pretty much out of time for this episode.
We're wrapping it up. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, so until next time, I'll catch you guys later.
Request information requested. Later.